So it's a good question about what we think the outcome will be from COP21. And in some senses, it does depend a little bit on what your expectations are. And you can imagine a spectrum of outcomes from, on the one hand, sort of complete breakdown and inability to come to any kind of agreement on what the international community should do, to, at the other end of the spectrum, a fully legal, globally signed up treaty with very specific targets and mechanisms in place. And I'm definitely not my area of expertise, but I suspect the outcome will lie somewhere in between those two ends of the spectrum. And in fact, one of the things that the UK can potentially add to making sure that an outcome is good for the global experience is what are the institutional mechanisms, the checks and balances that we have in place in the UK that gives us confidence that we are on a sensible path towards emissions reductions and 2050 outcomes. And so the fact that we have the Climate Change Act, the fact that we have an independent body, Committee on Climate Change, which acts as a check and balance and an impartial advisor to government and parliament about what should be done, and then allows the politicians to make the political decisions. Those types of institutional mechanisms, which don't require a global agreement, but provide confidence in a global context that the commitments that each country has made, they will live up to because these institutional mechanisms are in place. Those types of things, the hope would be, I think, that those types of things come out of Paris if we fall short of a globally binding treaty, because then the issue will be, how do we know that each national commitment is a genuine commitment that will be lived up to? I was expecting pledges to be coming forward through the course of March as well, and exactly what's happening on the international stage and about why they haven't come forward yet, I don't know. As you say, we have certain very important benchmarks in place. We clearly have the European pledge and the EU agreement. We had statements in December, as you said, from the US and China and others about what they were aiming for through the 2020s. And a sense of momentum building towards Paris. Now, my hope, I guess, would be that the reason we haven't seen lots of pledges coming forward so far is that people are thinking about it very carefully and understand that the commitments that will be made in Paris will be commitments to which countries will have to be confident they can achieve them, and there'll be mechanisms in place, whether it's domestic mechanisms or international mechanisms in place, to hold countries to account for the pledges that they make. So how fast should each sort of region of the world go, and therefore who has to be aggressive in relatively short-term pledges and who can wait, is a really important question. And the UK has positioned itself as moving relatively quickly towards both a 2030 and a 2050 emissions reduction target. Partly because, and this is the type of analysis that the Committee on Climate Change does, because that's actually a cost-effective way, sort of slow but steady, in this case, does win the race, rather than not doing a lot for a long period of time and then all of a sudden having to do something. And so partly because that's the cost-effective way, but also because the way in which you can best leverage your experience in order to get action elsewhere is clearly to lead a little bit by example.